Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Michel van Bellinghen. I'm Beric Chair 2021, the body of European regulators for electronic communications that group all telco regulators in Europe. And it is a great pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on Digital Markets Act, with a focus on market entry. And as you probably know, telco regulators have been promoted competitions for 2 decades now by imposing remedies to ensure a fair and non-discriminatory market entry so that new entrants can compete with incumbent operators. We see that in this DMA proposal, promoting the market contestability is one of the key elements. And we just to ask ourselves, how can we best achieve this? And this is the focus of today's webinar. We in Beric also consider that this objective is a very good one, and we will also aim at fostering inter-platform competition between alternative digital platforms and the gatekeepers, to the benefit of business users, to the benefit of consumers as well, and knowing that this will also prevent gatekeepers from acting unfairly towards these business users and these consumers. So you probably know that we have engaged in the past on this topic. We have written a lot of reports, contribution in trying to help to have the best regulatory framework design, and a very efficient one as well. And yes, today we'll think that it's worth to have a closer look at the aspects of contestability, and more precisely to hear from you and to draw lessons that we can also include in our reports that we are writing. Today's webinar will be divided in 2 sessions. During the first sessions, we will have the pleasure to welcome distinguished speakers. First one will represent the European Commission, DG Connect. This is Mr. Prabhat Agarwal. Welcome to you, Prabhat. And the representative of the European Parliament will have the pleasure and the honor to welcome Mr. Carlos Zorrinho. But first of all, let me take the opportunity to have the presentation of Beric opinion on the DMA. And for that, it is my estimated colleague, Chiara Caccinelli, one of the 2 key co-authors of this opinion, who will take the floor to explain you this opinion. So with that, Clara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michel. So I have a couple of slides, and I will wait for it to be shown. So yes, I will present the key proposals by Beric on the regulation of digital gatekeepers. On the first slide, we see that it is not actually new for Beric to focus on topics related to digital platforms and digital economy more broadly. On top of the work that we did on OTT services already 5 years ago, we have also published a report on device neutrality, data economy, and have more recently largely contributed to the debate on the Digital Markets Act. We responded to the public consultation of the European Commission last year, and we have produced an opinion on the DMA and a full report on the regulation of digital gatekeepers this year. All these documents that you see online, or see now on the screen, are also publicly available, and we put a list of references on the event page. For the current work, Beric will publish in June a study on the consumer's behavior towards digital platforms as a means of communication. And we are currently working on a report on the internet value chain and the internet ecosystem, which will be published next year. So as you can see, we have been working on these topics for a long time now. And over the last years, our approach has always been to build on the 2-decade-long experience that we have in ex-ante regulation in a closely related sector, the telecom sector. And because we believe that it would be very valuable to help shaping the regulation of digital gatekeepers now. On the next slide, we can see in a nutshell what we are proposing for making the DMA swift, effective, and future-proof. So next slide, please. Okay, perfect. So first of all, we strongly welcome the DMA ambition to create fair and contestable markets. And to make them contestable, we believe that some barriers to entry must be lowered to create real conditions for competitors to arise. And this could imply, for instance, extending interoperability measures to other CPSs, or also better addressing the impact on end users' choice of by default settings and so on. And this is exactly why we have organized this workshop and what we want to learn more from our speakers also in the stakeholders roundtable. And secondly, about the enforcement. So to make the DMA ambition and reality, we believe that there are some improvements which are needed to ensure that this intervention is swift, effective, and future-proof. And when we say swift, what we mean is that the results must be effective in a short time frame, and not that the intervention must be applied quickly, because if it does not reach the objectives, then it will actually finally take longer. So it is about the timing of the effectiveness of the results which counts. And then about making it future-proof. So we mean that the regulation must be able to keep addressing the issues even when the gatekeepers' practices will evolve, because they may evolve even before the regulation comes actually into force. So we believe that there must be a way to make sure that this regulation can react quickly. So to make it swift, we have 3 main proposals: the regulatory dialogue, dispute resolution mechanisms, and the national support. For the regulatory dialogue, as ex-ante regulators, we have learned that measures, especially when they are highly technical, they cannot be effective if they are not correctly specified and designed. And interoperability is a very good example for this. And to specify an obligation, you cannot just ask the gatekeepers how it should be done, but you need to create a structured regulatory dialogue with different types of stakeholders, because it is actually the challengers to the gatekeepers who can also give very relevant information about what is needed to make this intervention effective. And also because the gatekeepers has, of course, no real incentive to lower these information asymmetries, which is now present. And concretely, this could also mean, for instance, that the proposal by the gatekeepers on how to specify the obligations can be challenged by the stakeholders in an open public consultation, for instance. This is one of the many examples of how to do it concretely. And also sometimes the specifications of the obligations may not be correctly implemented by the gatekeepers. And in this case, it is very key to intervene fast. That's why we propose to set up a dispute resolution mechanisms, so to minimize the negative effects on competition dynamics and innovation, so that the business users, for instance, can raise a concern, so can raise a complaint to the EU regulators for it to intervene fast and solve this dispute. And while the intervention should be at the EU level, we support, of course, this intervention, pan-European intervention. Still, we believe that there are national independent authorities which can support the European Commission with their existing experience in data gathering, monitoring of markets, monitoring of remedy compliance, dispute resolution mechanisms. And so the enforcement would be centralized at the EU level, but the national support can be very valuable for the efficient implementation of this ambitious regulation. And then to make it future-proof. Again, future-proof means that we think that the Commission has to be allowed to intervene quickly even when the practices change. So we need to have more flexibility as well from the beginning. So together with the obligations that we have already in the DMA, with some refinements, we believe that there must be also ex-ante principles in the law, which allow the Commission to easily design further remedies in case the obligations are not correctly addressing the issues. And this flexibility, once more, it has to be on top of the obligations which are already listed. So it would not be about replacing them, but giving more flexibility to the commissions to adapt over time. So, for instance, an example principle could be that access to essential inputs must be granted if it is necessary to reach the given objective of the regulation. So this would be in the law, and then it is applied on a case-by-case basis. And this is how ex-ante regulation in telecom sector has been enforced for over 20 years. So there is also a relevant experience to get inspiration from. And finally, on the scope, on the regulatory certainty, we are currently working at Beric on a report on the interplay between the European Code for Electronic Communications and the DMA. Concerning a number of independent interpersonal communication services, which are also regulated in the telecom sector. And in general, we believe that for regulatory certainty, overlappings should be avoided in order to ensure that there is an appropriate interplay between this existing regulation. So this is, in a nutshell, the Beric position, and all the documents, as I said, are publicly available on the events page. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chiara, for this very comprehensive overview of the gist of Beric's proposal on DMA. And so with that, it's time to hear the views of the European Commission. And for that, I'll have the pleasure to invite Mr. Prabhat Agarwal to take the floor. He is head of a unit at DG Connect, and dealing with the digital services and platforms, and he joined the European Commission in 2007 and has since then covered a variety of digital innovation and regulatory areas. And prior to joining the Commission, Mr. Prabhat Agarwal worked on micro and nanotechnologies for Philips Research and NXP Semiconductors. He studied physics in the UK and France and holds a PhD on condensed matter physics from the University of Cambridge. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Prabhat. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michel, for this kind introduction and for the opportunity to speak here. Today, and also thank you very much to Chiara for this great kickoff with Beric's reflections. I will only react at the end slightly, but I thought that I started a little bit by rewinding to the question that was in the title of the workshop, which was on market entry, and just because I think we have spoken a lot about various aspects of the Digital Markets Act, and I know in this workshop today we're hearing many suggestions, and in many workshops around the virtual Brussels bubble at the moment, there are heated discussions about several aspects of the Digital Markets Act. But I thought it's a good moment, 5 months after we really presented the proposal, to just step back a bit and rewind a bit to some of the issues around market entry in the broader sense that have led us to make the proposal. So I'll make about 5 points first, and then I'll have a quick reaction to Chiara's excellent slideshow as a way of kicking off the discussion today. So we've been should first start by saying, I mean, the Digital Markets Act is a joint initiative of various different parts of the European Commission, and many different departments have come together, not just in the writing and the drafting and the negotiation of the proposals as we are, but in fact throughout the past years. And the Digital Markets Act in many ways is a milestone in what has been a very successful and deep collaboration across different departments, and notably on the Digital Markets Act. This has been the fruit of a very intense collaboration with DG Competition, of course, who have been studying this, very intensely DG Connect, and in DG Connect various departments have been looking at issues related here, including the colleagues responsible for the telecommunications code as well, and as well as our team, and also DG Grow, who have been working with us on many things. So in the work that has underpinned the Digital Markets Act, really we have brought together many different parts of expertise of the European Commission, and maybe my first point is that is really the realization, which I think has really become mainstream only in the last 2 or 3 years, or maybe a bit longer, of the qualitative and quantitative difference in some digital markets with some more traditional markets. And although, of course, Jean Tirol's Nobel Prize is now almost 2 decades away from us, the real understanding of some of these digital specific phenomena has only really infiltrated the policy circles, policy design circles, I would say, in the last 4 or 5 years. And in part of this was is of course the question on the specific barriers to entry in digital markets. So a range of research reports, both by national competition authorities, but also by the European Commission's, most notably the Special Advisor Report to Executive Vice President Vestager, but also international reports in the US, in the Stigler Center, in the UK, the Furman Report, and many others that I cannot cite individually, have gathered really quite compelling evidence over the last years on the specifics when it comes to entry barriers in these data-driven markets that we are analyzing. In the impact assessment for the Digital Markets Act, we try to, of course, synthesize some of these elements and distill them into policy options. And one of the things that we've been looking at in the impact assessment is to what extent are these markets self-correcting. And of course, normal markets have a self-correcting dimensions. For example, if there's an excessively high profit by one actor in a particular market, then this will naturally lead to entrance of competitors who want to have a share of this particular high profit. And what we have observed in many ways in digital markets, this dynamic is different. And in so many ways, let me summarize some of the key policy relevant thoughts that we have come across. Is that the entrance in data-driven markets, of course, face a specific situation of the that is related to the particular nature of these zero marginal cost data-driven network effects, and many different words that we can use to describe similar phenomena. So I'm just using maybe unscientifically terms that we have used in our impact assessment, but really the entrants that face a range of barriers in these digital markets, and they include the need to be cost effective, and this is can be very difficult in a situation where we have zero pricing on one side of the market, or because of the scale and scope economies that are really inherent to the digital platform markets. There are also barriers that have been identified in these various reports that relate to the challenging of an incumbent's products or services. That's because, well, a variety of different features. One is the ability, the technological ability of some of these incumbents to replicate existing services. I think I don't know how many of you have recently tried the Clubhouse clones by Twitter and by Facebook, and for an occasional Clubhouse users, it's really remarkable how quick it was to replicate the audio feature of Clubhouse, and not only to my amusement is the technology replicated very easily, but also the conversations seem to be very similar in all of these platforms. So and at least to the extent that I have participated in some of these exchanges. So that was just a joke on the side. Then the other barriers that we have encountered and documented in many of the in-depth reports are new barriers to switching. I mean, switching barriers are well known in other markets, in telecoms markets. Of course, this is regulated. In banking sectors also, there are barriers to switching that have been analyzed. But here we've also seen that network effects changed the dynamics of switching costs. I mean, one classic example that many of you have already encountered is the need to take your network with you. You know, coordinated switching. Yeah? So if I leave my favorite social media where I'm friends with many other connections, then in fact effective switching means that all of my friends have to migrate at the same time. And these are some of the barriers that are perhaps not completely unheard of in other markets, but they have some qualitative and certainly some quantitative differences in the kind of data-driven network markets that we are dealing with. So collectively, these generate some particular barriers to entry, and that we wanted to address in the Digital Markets Act. Secondly, I think it's all relatively well documented as well that a side effect or even a central effect of these of the multi-sidedness of some of these platform needs that even in theoretical but also in practical situations that there is a tendency of these systems to tip because of these generating a certain winner takes it all dynamics that is kind of mutually reinforcing. So and this we have also seen in smaller markets. Even not only in search engines or social media, but we've also seen that these tipping dynamics exist even in relatively young markets. You know, it's concentration tendency tend to happen. I mean, before the lockdown, it was very interesting to watch in Brussels. For those who live in Brussels, the dynamics around the scooters in the street, where you could actually just visually see the tipping dynamics before your eyes because they are all fluorescent colors, and just by looking at the street, you can actually determine to some extent, but just by looking at color codes, you know what the tipping dynamics of a particular day is, and some confusion is recently because some rebranding has taken place, but they kept the colors of the previous incumbents. For those who live in Brussels, you will know what I mean. And this has led to another dynamics, which is that so-called what we call gatekeepers. They deploy a certain relationship of economic dependence or asymmetries and bargaining powers. This is something that we already observed at the time of the platform to business relationship when we regulated that, and we already then called the regulation fairness and transparency in platform to business relationships. So these barriers are really special. So my final point before I just briefly to Chiara's comment was that the DMA is basically body of thinking that has accumulated over many years and has kind of represents a very strong and solid international consensus on the dynamics that are particular there. And therefore, we've identified in the DMA a couple of measures that we propose to rectify some of what we consider undesirable effects of these specific dynamics in terms of market entry. One is measures that prevent unfair self-preferencing in particular cases, or data-related rules such as including data portability, which would facilitate switching and multi-homing, and therefore maybe address one of the specific dynamics that we have identified as the underlying driver. Other measures that promote multi-homing and user switching that could give competitors and new entrants a real chance to capture a new stream of demand and propose competitive offers and grow. and just want to stress, without, in our view, limiting existing incumbents' ability to continue to provide some of the services. We've also got proposed some rules on MFN clauses that would increase incentives for competitors to develop alternatives, to the gatekeeper distribution channels, since those might be, lead to better service or lower price that might in the end lead to also greater choice and more consumer benefits there. So those are some examples, and I don't want to exhaustively cover everything, but I just wanted to respond to the theme of the workshop and say, well, digital markets have a very particular dynamics because of the data-driven network effects on multi-sided markets. These dynamics lead to new forms of entry barriers. They are new not because they don't exist at all in other markets, in offline markets, but they have some qualitative and some quantitative differences with existing systems that we that we have encountered. This, in our view, leads to an economic dependency and to some unfair trading businesses that we regulate in the Digital Markets Act. Now, I will stop here with a brief presentation of the underlying logic, because I think that we will have many opportunities also in the second half of the session to hear reactions from many stakeholders, and I'm sure some like it and some don't like it. This is a part of the place where we are, but just maybe allow 1 second on the reactions to Chiara's excellent intervention on the Beric proposal. And let me just say 3 things. I think that certainly we can learn very much from the experience in related ex ante interventions, even if there are some again some quantitative and qualitative differences across the markets, but there are also some similarities, and certainly we can learn from the experience that has existed in trying to increase contestability in some digital markets such as the ones that we have in. Particularly, I think we are keen to discuss in more depth issues that have been raised by other stakeholders around interoperability, around default settings, around some of the behavioral cues that may also contribute to consumer lock-in, and several stakeholders have led this. We have recognized them in the impact assessment for those who have done a careful reading of our work, and including some footnotes, which I put there right at the end of our impact assessment process. But we are very much open to discussing some more, because I think this has been on the enforcement part. I think really this is very keen, and this is also something that politically has been very dear to both Commissioner Breton and Executive Vice President Vestager, where the importance of these rules being enforceable effectively is extremely important. And I think I do take your point that that business users or third parties who are affected by the rules and the unfair commercial practices, they can bring a lot of experience and knowledge into the system, and we're certainly open to reflecting on how this knowledge can be better. I think, and our view is that nothing in the DMA really prevented this from happening anyway, but we are very much open to reflecting further on how this knowledge can be improved. And these two, maybe I'll just stop here because I know that I've exceeded my speaking time already. But I just wanted to maybe thank also once more for this very constructive dialogue, and for Beric to organizing this debate. And I'll be very keen, and I know that several of my colleagues are both online and in the background who are also listening, also from the whole DMA team, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, is not only DG Connect, but also includes the colleagues in DG Competition and DG Grow. So I'll stop here with that. Back to you, Michel, and thank you again.
Thank you so much, Prabhat, for this very rich and dense intervention, and especially for having reacted to Beric's opinion. I'm sure we will discuss this further on later. And now that we have here the views of the European Commission, I guess that we all curious to hear the views of the European Parliament and what Parliament think about this. And it is a great honor for us and for Beric to have with us Mr. Carlos Zorrinho, the rapporteur on the DMA in the ITRE committee. So here in Brussels, Mr. Zorrinho hardly needs an introduction. He has a long track record as a university professor, as a politician, serving as Secretary of State for Energy and Innovation in Portugal, and becoming a leader of the Socialist Party's parliamentary group in 2011. He joined the European Parliament since 2014 and is particularly active in the domain of digital policy. So please, Mr. Zorrinho, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michel. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this very important workshop. I have been asked as ITRE rapporteur, as you told us, to make a speech focusing on the state of play of the DMA in the European Parliament. It has been difficult, really, to start the working process in the European Parliament. So I need to talk more about how it will work than about the EP positions, but I will add naturally some personal reflections. And this difficulty to take off in the Parliament is not coincidence and deserves a brief initial reflection. You are at the launching in a global and also in a European terms of a second wave of digitalization. And this is not the moment to characterize it, but however, I would like to underline that this is an opportunity to differentiate the European approach, to embed in our shared values, to embed these values in our shared values, to deepen our strategic autonomy, sharing value chains with shared control and monitoring, assuming a multi-level line, but managing, whenever possible, to influence in a relevant way the global standards at ITRE with the GPDR. And I fully agree with Chiara told us about the need of a multilateral approach and to improve all the sharing of experiences and all the possible dialogue. I think this is really very, very important for people and for the future of the European Union and also for the future of the humankind and for a fair globalization. If something characterizes the second wave of digitalization, it is transversal nature. And it is normal that a regulation such as the DMA has somewhat to do with almost all the issues dealt in the various committees of the European Parliament. It was the same, I believe, with the various commissioners. It's perhaps easier to choose one to lead, but with the various commissions portfolios and also with the various council formations. That is why the IMCO, the ITRE, the ECON, the CULT, the LIBE, and the jury committees have all the 6 committees show interest in sharing competences in this file. In particular, the IMCO, ITRE, and ECON committees have applied and have sent arguments to lead the file. This example of the DMA, but also of the DSA and other files, should lead us to rethink the way in which our institutions are organized. Sectorial approaches are increasingly artificial. Cross-cutting approaches are increasingly necessary, in my opinion. After a deep exchange of letters and arguments, the Conference of Committee Chairs in the European Parliament tabled a recommendation to the Conference of Presidents that will be, I think, approved in the meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Following my interpretation, and is my interpretation of the exchange of arguments and letters, I expect that the Conference of Presidents will adopt a division of competences and some associated procedures, which will provide the Parliament finally with the conditions to make an excellent job for assessing and improving the legislative proposal. I believe that the INCO committee will remain the committee responsible. I believe that the ECON and ITRE committees will be associated under Rule 57 with shared competencies over the entire proposal and with the additional elements for cooperation that I will mention after. And the other three committees, the LIBE, Jury, and Cult committees, will contribute with opinions under the Rule 56. The application of the Rule 57 Plus, as now we call it, means that INCO, ITRE, and ECON share competencies in all the file without prejudice of its specific competencies. Moreover, under Rule 56, the LIBE, Jury, and Cult committees will have also specific competencies. In this scenario, Rule 57 will share competencies for the ECON and ITRE committees over the entire proposal, and this is the starting point. However, due to the horizontal nature and major importance of the proposal, it is crucial to guarantee the real participation of the associated committees during the entire legislative process. Good cooperation between INCO, ITRE, and ECON committees, which are to have responsibility for the whole file, will be an essential condition for making the work more effective. And there are some procedures about that, some additional elements that I think the Conference of Presidents will approve also tomorrow. For instance, scheduling regular meetings between the three rapporteurs. The rapporteurs of ECON and ITRE shall be invited to participate in all INCO shadows meetings, and also the amendments will be made not at a level of a committee but at a level of a plenary stage, and the Parliament mandate to enter in negotiations with Council shall be a plenary mandate and not another kind of mandate. The ECON and ITRE rapporteurs shall be invited to participate in trilogues and their preparatory meetings, and the position of the associated committees shall be duly taken in account by the INCO committee when evaluating the outcome of the negotiation. So this is the state of play now to begin, and me and myself as ITRE rapporteur, I will be attentive to all the file and more naturally to the specific competencies of ITRE. It's interesting to reflect a little about the arguments of INCO and ITRE when they try to lead the file. INCO argue that this is a question of internal market because this is a question of process, is a question of gatekeepers, a process including the regulation by gatekeepers. Then, as I understand, this is the vision that win. But ITRE committee has another argument and tell that this is more a question about information society service, about how to ensure that these information society services are disponible with fair competition and access to consumers, protecting whole and also protecting the capability of European Union to be competitive in the new global digital market. In fact, both the process and the content are crucial. And the approach in one perspective needs to be complemented by the other. If you look to the file as a process, we need to take care about the information society services that work under this process. If you look to the information society services, we need to have a process, a fair process to regulate it, to enforce this regulation. Therefore, my focus will be on preventing the process from distorting the content. in all articles, but in particular those that are ITRE responsibility. Some examples, because till now I'm yet listening to many stakeholders in a phase of reflection and integration to consolidate the possible amendments to be proposed, and it's also very useful for me to know better the very clear position of Beric and his three main pillars to improvement of the file. The ITRE committee is responsible for to assure that, and it's my global interpretation, to assure that the information society services are embedded by the European common values like data protection, like transparency, and also portability, as is talking in the last intervention of my. It's a human-centered approach. We try to develop some kind of, and I was the rapporteur of Wi-Fi for You, something I try in a small program. Now it's another opportunity to try something to have an universal access, mostly for consumers, inspired by a data deal. I call a data deal, that are the Green Deal. I call it sometimes a data deal, a data European citizenship data deal. What I want to say with that is to have in Europe with our rules consent data given by people, use in exchange for better solutions and some general interest in universal services. I think this is a very important data deal that we need to try. Assure also the whole of public markets of service and goods, and also the participation of public frameworks in the system. In particular, when I need to care about the industrial policy, I will try to make some amendments to put the process, the process. Now I call the gatekeepers model the process, and my approach the content to have the process compatible with the dynamic and small, medium, friendly industrial ecosystem and its networks. Something that I try to hear all people and to try to make some improvements. I don't want to have a very good piece of legislation that don't work. I know that one of the big advantages of the Commission proposal is that this is easy, clear, and difficult to promote malicious juridical problems. So I know also that when I want to add some qualitative issues, these qualitative issues need also to be resistant to these problems of subjectivity and juridical problems. It's not easy. We are working with some enterprises with strong capabilities, but for that we need to try to be simple but effective. Simple but effective. And about the other priority of ITRE, that is to promote research, innovation policy, science, technology, and also dissemination and exploitation of research findings. I think that we need also to make some improvements to promote knowledge share and continuous innovation, scientific improvement, and to create conditions to have this kind of multilateral cooperation, win-win games in the process. And about the networks, about the information technology and the technologies, it's really important to increase portability. Interoperability, it's a key issue for all the people that I hear. It's very interesting because I hear small stakeholders, big stakeholders, all are ideas to have some clarification in interoperability. Some of these aims are incompatible, but this is the work to someone that is working in a file. Also, to assure cybersecurity in the process to improve the quality, the competition, and the access to information society services, protecting, that is the final aim of this whole, players and consumers. And sure, promoting all the dialogue between all people to try to find the better solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Zorrinho, to have given us this insight and state of play between the different committees, for your reflections and your kind words towards the independent national authorities. And we see that you also share with us the concern of ineffective regulation as well, and related to the important role of interoperability. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this first session. This will help in setting the scene for the stakeholders we have invited today, and or two co-chairs of the Beric Market and Economic Analysis Working Group. My estimated colleagues Jorge and Chiara will take it from here, and with that you will be in very good hands. So Jorge, may I ask you to introduce today's speakers for the second session, please. You have the floor.
Sure. Thank you, Michel, and thank you also to Mr. Agarwal and Mr. Zorrinho for the interesting introduction, I would say, to the discussion we will have now. We have seen. So, in line with the proposal from Beric on having a structured dialogue with all actors, and especially those small actors benefiting from potentially from the regulation, the idea for this is to hear directly from them, from challenging platforms, startups, on their views about the DMA in relation to market entry. As you have seen in the agenda, we are asking them to structure their intervention based on key issues as the factors limiting competition and entry, and of course the adequacy of the DMA to address that issues, and if they see any element to be improved or where it could go further. So the idea is now to have some short interventions, 10 minutes each, and then we will have a session on questions and answers. All of those who are following can send their questions in the tool. You have it in the right part, the question and answer. So if you send, we will see in direct. Okay. So about the speakers, you have the bio in the website, so I will be short. Essentially, we have two associations. First, the European Tech Alliance, represented by Magdalena Piech, who is the chair of the European Tech Alliance and also head of the regulatory affairs at Allegro. Thank you, Magdalena. And also from another association, the Alliance for Startups, we have Benedict Blomaya. So, yeah, you can see Benedict. And a part of the two associations, we have invited several challenging platforms. Of course, we could have here a lot of them, but we have a limited time. So we made a selection based essentially on being related with different CPS, etc. And on that we have here Petra Wilkstrom, who is the Director of Public Policy at Media Schibsted. Thank you, Petra. And from DuckDuckGo, we have Aurelian Mel, who is the Senior Public Policy Manager for Europe at DACO. And finally, we have also Cécile Barato, who is the Deputy Director for External Relations at Cdiscount, and it's also a very interesting platform. So, with no more delay, I give the floor for them, starting with Madalena. So, Madalena, the floor is yours. I think that we have a picture of.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you to Beric for organizing this important event and for the opportunity to present the European Tech Alliance views. So for those that don't know the EUTA yet, the Alliance is the only organization that brings together homegrown European tech scale-ups. We want to give the voice to some of the most exciting homegrown companies across business, across member states, and across sectors. Our objective is that to be able to contribute to our local economies and build a sustainable, greener, innovative, and inclusive Europe for future generation through technology and based on our EU values. If you have a look at the members map, you will see that the track record of successes and successful companies on this map proves the great growth that European digital market is seeing, but above all, a great potential that still exists. We believe that with the right legal framework and the policies that will enable innovation and competition for all players, Europe can continue to prosper and produce more global digital champions in the future. When it comes to what it's missing or what is how we see the situation on the European digital market, I would say that European member successes shows that Europe has a dynamic market, and in general there is a room for many companies to succeed both at national level and cross-border. I would say that indeed many of our companies are challengers, but also many of them are successful or they're on their national markets. We all believe that as much as we see the potential to grow on the digital market, there are areas of our functioning where competition is quite limited, and thus the relations with other players, call it gatekeepers, are not based on equal terms. And the risk exists to hinder our functioning unproportionately in case of unfair practices. Second, we see that cases where certain unfair business practices of global players are not necessarily appropriately addressed due to the lack of efficient enforcement comparable to the one that national players face. That's why we believe that intervention is needed, and enforcement based on antitrust that occurs after the abusive conduct has occurred, so exposed, it's not exactly the remedy for the current situation. So EUTA fully supports the approach that Commission took when drafting EUTA. We definitely believe that DMA is a proposal that can help to get the framework right. And I would say that there are two dimensions. First, it makes sure that players that hold keys to the EU and global digital market make sure that the door remains open. And second, by capturing EU and global dimension of issues at stake. We are particularly supportive when it comes to the shift in the approach from cure to prevention, of mix of qualitative and quantitative criteria to characterize gatekeepers. We're supportive on inclusion of list of self-executing obligations, and also of the fact that enforcement will be handled at the EU level, given the cross-border and even global nature of gatekeepers and need for unified answer at the EU level. Now, we do some areas for refinement in the proposal, and I would divide them into 4 areas. First, we believe that the scope of gatekeeper definition should be narrowed to rightly target gatekeepers now, but also in the next years. So 2 points here. First, when it comes to quantitative thresholds that together create the rebuttable presumptions. When it comes to member states and the geographical reach, 3 member states, that does not necessarily mean that someone has a gatekeeper position at the EU level, especially if we take into account smaller markets like Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. Second, when it comes to number of users, and currently foreseen 40 million, we believe that this number is relatively low, given what MEP Zorrinho mentioned, the second wave of digitalization. We see more and more users coming online, and this will be even faster in the years to come. So probably reflection whether this is an appropriate number would be necessary. On the scope, the last point is essential issue to clarify would be the definition of user. From our perspective and the variety of a business model we see, there's a big difference between a user that simply view the content and someone who actively buy, book, or use a service. So that to capture the active user right, a bit more clarity is needed, and we believe it would be better done in the act in itself. Second area where we see room for refinement is the acceleration of gatekeeper designation and compliance procedure. I think it was very clearly underlined in the previous presentation by Chiara. We feel that the self-identification by gatekeepers, the qualitative assessment process, and the rebuttal opportunities should have shorter deadlines. Third point is regarding obligations against abusive practices. We believe that DMA could benefit from more detailed and prescriptive prohibitions, obligations not to engage into lengthy dialogue. And also, we would welcome more clarity on the procedure to clarify behaviors described in the Article 6 and how the regulatory dialogue could work in order to avoid circumvention by gatekeeper platforms. Finally, on enforcement at the EU level, we see behavioral and structural remedies as serious alternatives to financial penalties, which haven't always proved efficient. We are concerned that proposed fine in case of systemic non-compliance or bad faith actors may prove ineffective. We support the use of interim measures in case of delays of regular proceedings. And last but not least, besides the Digital Market Advisory Committee, which will assist the Commission on the examination of specific cases and measures, I would echo the point which was made by Beric earlier, that exchange with business could be helpful to make sure what impact suggested measures would have on the market. We're looking forward to further discuss and contribute to discussion at the European Parliament and Council, and we fully share the views expressed earlier that the quicker the DMA is adopted, the better for the digital single market. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madalena. So we have now Benedict Romanya, Director of EU Policy at Allied for Startups. So Benedict, the floor is yours.
Thank you also from my side for the invitation and for what has been a really interesting discussion so far. For those of you who don't know Allied for Startups, we're a global network of 46 startup organizations ranging from Startup Portugal to Startup Canada, representing thousands of startups, including platforms. I'd like to share 2 basic thoughts about our approach and then afterwards share feedback specifically on the DMA. So the way we've tried to approach it, the DMA so far, is that for us, startups are the ultimate competitors of our economies. They are born from the essence of a competitive thought. They aim to challenge established players, digital or analog. And in this last, tumultuous year, I don't think I need to go into more detail. Think of Zoom or Hopin challenging incumbents in the video call market, for instance, and Hopin with a valuation going from 0 to over 5 billion in 1 year. I think we all agree that we want more of these champions, and that designing a regulatory framework that supports startups is the best investment we can make in competitive markets. So what does this mean? We therefore are supportive of measures that increase contestability of markets, as startups should be the key beneficiaries of more competitiveness. And making it concrete, our members agree with the goal of the DMA, and as Magda was also referring to before, we are also in favor of things like increased portability, interoperability, being able to raise issues with authorities, to name a few of the things we are supportive of in the DMA. We also know that startups are founded and scale up in interconnected ecosystems. Today, entrepreneurs use hundreds or thousands of platforms to set up, organize, manage, promote their business globally. And this enables entrepreneurs actually to focus on the customers and scale. In this process, startups can become customers, complements, or competitors of established players, or what we talk about as gatekeepers today. So what does this mean for us? We think there are places where we think the DMA can avoid or unintended negative consequences or be further clarified. And I'm surprised, I was happy to note that a lot of this overlapped actually with what Magdalena was saying before. So I'll try to condense my remarks here to give more time for the discussion. Firstly, we would love to see the scope clarified further. Specifically, when does a scale-up become an emerging gatekeeper? So far, I've been on several kind of panels and listened to many more, being told that this really only applies to the big players, also Article 3.6. But I mean, all startups want to be big players. And if we design quantitative thresholds, what's kind of the bigger point if we make a tool with Article 3.6, where we go below the quantitative threshold and designate scale-ups as emerging gatekeepers if we're below that still. Secondly, in the case that a scale-up does fall in the scope, we would like to see a better idea of what the processes will be like. I think that lines up nicely with the regulatory dialogue point made before. Will we treat all platforms with a one-size-fits-all approach, or how will the obligations be implemented? And we would also love to see a clearer connection to the startup and the innovation ecosystems, as Chiara was pointing out in this amazing opening presentation. How are we talking to startup ecosystems to identify when there really is systemically anti-competitive behavior going forward? Thirdly, we would love to see a broader understanding of the startup lifecycle in the DMA. And many startups are founded with the goal of being acquired, doing an exit. And we think exits and rising investment levels are a sign that innovation is working, and there are multipliers for ecosystems. There's a strong correlation between exits and investments in startup ecosystems. Exits or acquisitions do not mean a loss of innovation or jobs. And there's plenty of examples also in Europe, like the Estonian mafia or the Criteo mafia. And to a point that was made earlier, I mean, many new digital markets are, all about trying things out, and they may not be sustainable in the long run for multiple players. So it could be that in some markets you see a consolidation, and this can happen through acquisitions of startups and scale-ups, and that's oftentimes a regular process through which a critical mass of users can be built. Fundamentally, the DMA should not make it harder for exits and acquisitions and consolidation in the EU than in other markets. Rather, we should be building a DMA that ends up with us having more Estonian mafias at the end of the day. Regarding the discussion questions, I'd also just wanted to share 3 quick thoughts. As it was also said by Magdalena, I feel like a broken record. There's already over 10,000 platforms in Europe. So it's important for us to understand that a lot is working well, and we don't undermine startup ecosystems which are bringing a lot of innovation to Europe. For instance, if we say that there is not enough transnational digital platforms, why are we making a threshold of the DMA based on whether you're active in more than 3 member states? You know, where's the measure here that's going to encourage going European and scaling across borders? Also, regarding the point about encouraging market entry, we actually did a survey of hundreds of investors a few years ago, and 81% of these investors we interviewed agreed that designing legislation to hit big players, i.e. mowing the lawn, could end up hurting smaller players more. So this is a great exercise for us to keep asking ourselves whether what we're doing is actually encouraging startups to get founded and to enter the market. Of course, if there's anti-competitive or anti-contestable practices, as we call them now, then these should be addressed. And really curious to see if the DMA is kind of going down this avenue and where it could be improved potentially. But I think this is a great question to come back to, is whether we are really making sure there's more market entry by startups at the end of the day. There are many more important elements in the DMA that we are supportive of. Equal access for data for innovative startups is one of those. But we're looking forward to kind of playing a constructive role to clarify points on scope, process, and ecosystem impact. I'm available for questions and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benedict. Just a reminder for all attending that you can already send your questions. You have the icon in the right upper side of the tool. So if anything, any question arises, etc., you can share it at the moment. So going to with the next speaker. The next speaker is Petra Wikström from Media Schibsted. So Petra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and thank you to Beric for inviting me to this very interesting workshop on this extremely important issue. Very briefly about Schibsted first. We are a Nordic digital company with different kind of business areas. So we are the largest publisher in the Scandinavia, with newspapers in Norway and Sweden. We are the largest operator of classifieds marketplaces in the Nordic market, but we are also a big investor in tech startups, mainly in the field of financial technology and collaborative economies. And we have, for example, a lot of price comparison sites. So due to our portfolio of these kind of different kind of digital companies, we are really interested in the discussion about the DMA, because we believe that this regulation will allow us to grow and innovate more, but also to have a better relationship with our users on the market. But today I have been invited to discuss the DMA from a media perspective, so I will take the publisher's hat on. And I would like to start by giving you a few concrete examples of why we think that the ex-ante regulation is so important for the publishing sector. First of all, we of course have to remember that publishing is quite national, but at the same time we are totally dependent on global companies to reach our viewers and reach our readers. But we are also competitors with these same companies, mainly when it comes to the advertising income that we live on. So we are sort of in a very complicated relationship with these gatekeepers. And we actually do think that there are a lot of things that could be solved by this particular regulation. And I will give you 3 examples of the challenges that we face as publishers today. First of all, it's not a secret. Everybody knows that publishers have been struggling with declining advertising income. We actually see that all the new money coming into the advertising market online goes to 2 companies named Facebook and Google. And in Sweden, for example, up to 130% of the growth in the market goes to these 2 companies. So this is, of course, a problem. And why is that? Well, one of the reasons why advertisers are so attracted by these companies is that they have enormous data potential. They can collect data from their own ecosystems, but they can also collect data outside their own ecosystems, and by that create profiles of people that nobody can match. Not media companies, but nobody else either. So that's sort of one of the reasons why they are so attractive and get so much advertising income. The other problem is that today advertisers have to use programmatic ad networks to reach their audiences and target groups. So it's not like before when we would have a discussion, for example, our newspapers would talk to Volvo or some other company and have sort of a negotiation about how much advertising they would invest in our newspapers. Today we advertise through programmatic networks, and the largest network is owned by Google. There are a few challenges to that. First of all, Google locks in YouTube and its other services. So if you want to buy inventory on a broad range, including also YouTube, you have to go to the Google advertising network. We at Schibsted are very keen to try to find alternatives. We are working with other networks as well, but it's impossible to create as an attractive offer if you don't have all the platforms on the market. So this is an issue of interoperability. The other thing is that this programmatic advertising network is created on a lot of different parts, a lot of different fields in this network. And all of these different parts take certain fees. So when an advertiser invests in this network and in this auction and wants to reach a target audience, there are a lot of fees that basically disappear in the network. We call them ad tech taxes because we can't negotiate, but we also don't know how much money actually an advertiser is investing, for example, in our newspaper. We have estimated that we lose up to 60% of what the advertiser has invested in for example, advertising on one of our newspapers. So they dominate the advertising basically network, and also we have a big competitor when it comes to advertising income. And what do we do then? We have to create, of course, other ways of revenue, which would then be digital subscriptions. Here we have this, the third challenge. Digital subscriptions are very popular in Scandinavia. And also here we actually have a majority of people using an iPhone, which means that for a newspaper, it's totally important and extremely relevant to have apps in the Apple iOS App Store. What happens when we want to then sell a subscription in the app? We sell them both in the apps, but also on our website. If we sell a subscription on the website, we can basically collect the data about who buys the subscription, which we would do also when people buy physical subscriptions. So we would know where they live and so on. But if you buy a subscription from the app, we actually don't get any information at all. And there are several reasons for that. But the main reason is that Apple demands us to use their own payment system in-app purchase, which means that Apple can demand 30% of the income that we would get from the digital subscriber. But more importantly, we actually don't, we lose the customer relationship. So we don't know who buys the subscription. We don't know what they read in the app. We don't even know who they are if they would call customer service and have some issues with the content in the app. And we would know if they would cancel the subscription. We don't know anything about our readers. And this is quite important issue to remember, that for newspapers and for media, it's always been important to have that relationship. And finally, of course, the problem is that we cannot really negotiate with these large gatekeepers. We have all read about the iOS new update, which is coming, where we are going to be forced to ask for consent. It's an issue which we believe is very problematic. According to us, it goes beyond what GDPR requires from us. But this is something that we just cannot negotiate. We also cannot negotiate with, for example, these platforms when it comes to compensation or other kind of fees. So we really think that there needs to be a way to sort of level the relationship and to have a more balance. And that is why the DMA is so important, because actually the proposal contains solutions for all the issues I just mentioned. There is a proposal in the obligation saying that gatekeepers cannot collect data in the way that they do today and combine the data with their own data from their own ecosystem. There is a requirement saying that gatekeepers would have to give access to data about our own customers. And there is an obligation to be more transparent when it comes to pricing in the online advertising networks. And finally, there is a very important obligation to be able to have fair and reasonable terms and conditions. So we think that there are very good proposals here. But of course, we can always improve. And echoing what others have said today, the scope is important. We need to understand who are the gatekeepers, and we need to understand that now, not after the proposal has entered into force, because that is, of course, important to understand on what level we will put the obligations. We also think that some of the obligations perhaps should be tightened a bit to make sure, for example, that the data collection is not possible because somebody has consented to it, because we know that most people are logged on to these gatekeeper platforms and are not really being asked for consent regularly. And we also think that having access to your own customer data is such a fundamentally important thing to be able to innovate, to be able to offer relevant products and content to our users, that such an obligation, which is now in Article 6, should be more directly binding in Article 5. So there are a lot of good things in the proposal, and I would say that for Schibsted, we would like to see it in force yesterday. We really need it very, very quickly because we lose a lot of money, and when we lose money, it's more difficult for us to create good media products and to have media pluralism in our market. So very happy to discuss further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Petra, for such detailed exposition of different issues of media. Very interesting. Next speaker is Aurélien Mel from DataGo. So I directly leave the floor to him. Please, Aurélien.
Thank you very much, Jorge, and very happy to be here today. Even more because I really enjoy reading the Beric report on DMA, which I think is excellent work. Let me give you a few words on DataGo. We are an internet privacy company. So our mission is really to make online privacy simple and accessible for all, really for all those that have enough of hidden tracking online and want to take back their right to privacy in one install. People know us best for our search engine. Our search engine relies to make money on contextual ads instead of privacy invasive behavioral ads. And we've expanded what we do over the last years, offering a browser app that blocks trackers and enhance privacy wherever you go on the web. I would like to stress first that we really fully support the introduction of that regulation, and we want to welcome very clearly the Commission's decisive ambition there as a kind of first mover, I think, in the world there. To us, after years of slow or even failed antitrust proceedings, we think it is critical to dilute the power of gatekeepers by addressing non-harmful practices for the good of society, innovation, and competition. We also have the feeling, however, that the Commission stopped halfway in some regards, and particularly so by not addressing what we see in search as the most pervasive way to foreclose markets, and which are default settings and pre-installations for core platform services. And it is so despite the Commission's own impact assessment, recognizing the power of defaults in entrenching dominant positions. It means concretely that the DMA is somewhat too backward-looking. If I take the provisions that relate to default and pre-installation, they actually replicate the 2018 Android decision, which itself stopped short of directly banning Google's search default on Android, which Google had been doing indirectly through deals with equipment manufacturers. And the absence of a specific measure on the default means that Google managed to turn the decision at a time to their advantage, simply because they were left in charge of the remedy that would reinvigorate competition in the mobile search market. And so as a result, they introduced a deeply flawed choice screen or preference menu, which is when you get to choose your search default when setting up your device. And their system is based on an auction system, which, according to our experience, sucks profits out of rivals, transfer them to Google essentially, and on the longer run, favors low quality, privacy invasive search engines that are not the most popular on the market, because they are those simply that monetize much more per user through the use of invasive ads. So as a result, people are left with the impression that there is no viable alternative to Google, and market shares don't diversify. So for us, this experience shows that tackling the most pervasive forms of gatekeeper control, like default setting and pre-installation, require sound rules and proper enforcement. And that takes me to the Beric report, which is full of good ideas to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past and fix the shortcomings of the DMA. One can see the breadth of experience of Beric in regulated markets. Beric understands the importance of a well-resourced, effective, transparent decision-making process that includes industry stakeholders and grasp the state-of-the-art of technology. And these are dimensions that we don't see enough reflected in the DMA. Beric also very clearly explains the power of defaults in crystallizing positions and excluding rivals. And we actually think that if core platform services are indeed considered such important gateways, then we should follow that logic and prohibit indeed what is the most effective way that exists of making them unavoidable. In search in particular, securing the browser default or one level up the operating system default is absolutely critical to access consumers, and is the reason why Google pays Apple every year billions of euros to secure that position on Safari and iOS. So as a conclusion, the DMA should therefore ban core platform services default and pre-installations for gatekeepers. And just like it is actually foreseen for the search market by several important global regulators, the UK CMA, the DOJ investigation in the US against Google, recent action by the Austrian regulator, and of course, as it is made possible by the recent German reform. It doesn't mean that people should be offered empty devices, free of all apps. We think actually that consumers should be put in control of their search default across platforms. And it would be done by adding language in the DMA around consumer choice architecture, which would effectively add a tool in the toolbox of the regulator to introduce well-designed preference menus for these important default settings. By well-designed, I mean a system where the different options presented to the consumer are the most popular on the market. The design would be market tested with other industry stakeholders to ensure that it doesn't nudge people back to the dominant service. Another important point there is that a core platform service, so search engines in our case, should be able to show users a prompt on our website or app, which would enable the user to change all search defaults of the device in one click instead of 15 or even more as it takes now on Android and other devices. And we like that option very much because we believe that preference menus if well designed, where the user get to choose the option as default, can be highly effective. We've done research in the Android ecosystem where we showed that more than 20% of users would choose a non-Google alternative, while today Google's market share on mobile is around 95%. And to us, these kind of preference menus, kind of options are the kind of high leverage practical solutions we think the DMA should be based on. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Agarwal. Later on, you will all have the possibility to react to interventions from others, etc. So just to finish with this round of interventions, our last stop on this very short tour on different sectors with different platforms is Cdiscount, where we have Cécile Bagato, Deputy Director for External Relations at Cdiscount, and once more, I leave you the floor. And thank you to all of you for being just in the time. Cécile.
Thank you very much. It's a hard thing to go last because many very interesting things were already been said, but actually some of them are very important to Cdiscount too. So please indulge me if I'm being a little bit redundant. Maybe a very short introduction of Cdiscount. We started as an online CD player seller more than 20 years ago in Bordeaux, in France, hence our name, Cdiscount. And we are today the main French-born e-commerce player. We are part of a retail group Casino. You can see on the slide some of our key figures. We can say that Cdiscount turned into a real tech player the day we opened the marketplace, which was in 2011. And today we provide over 100 million products from 13,000 vendors all over Europe. And we are providing customers, of course, in France, but also other European countries. So maybe I'll start by saying that Cdiscount has contributed to the European Commission's consultation and the EU discussions concerning the DMA proposals with a lot of interest. We very much welcome the DMA as an instrument meant to level the playing field in digital markets. And indeed, as it was already said, large European players in some digital markets, and by large, I mean players that can reach consumers across borders in the EU are not that many, while these markets are dominated by huge extra-European players. Let's remember that these players were born and grown in unified and protected home markets, and they arrived on the EU market already strong with regard to innovation, but also financial capacity. And this may be one way of understanding today's lack of market contestability, along with reasons already explained earlier by Mr. Agarwal. This huge financial capacity can allow them to cross-finance activities and launch non-profitable activities. And when you add to this situation, control over users' data, you get unavoidable trading partners, as Petra explained very well regarding advertising. So this situation is, of course, bad for European companies and European consumers and must be addressed. Although we are fully aware of the difficulty of the task and also of the risks for the whole European digital ecosystem. So therefore, before talking about the obligations to which gatekeepers would be subject, allow me to talk about two aspects of the proposed DMA where greater clarity is needed. And first of all is the scope of DMA, and particularly the definition and conditions set for designating a gatekeeper. And second is its governance, by which I mean the enforcement system. I'll also take a few minutes to highlight some of the market entry issues we have faced where regulatory action is still needed, but goes very likely beyond the effective enforcement of the DMA. So first, regarding scope of the DMA, we see that the Commission opted for a flexible approach to defining a gatekeeper. The proposed text basically provides the Commission with the means to act swiftly in the face of challenges brought by rapid market changes. And this point is good. It's obviously a response brought to some of the calls for fixing flaws in competition law and especially the long delays of ex-post competition inquiries. But then, as Magdalena already said, it's first of utmost importance to ensure that the scope of the DMA encompasses only companies that are unavoidable trading partners and which de facto regulate access to certain markets. Otherwise, the DMA risks encompassing perhaps large companies, but with no gatekeeper role. And this would defeat the purpose of this regulation, which is to give more opportunities to tech companies and more alternatives to consumers. To have a more targeted scope and to give digital players certainty, we believe that certain criteria used to designating gatekeepers should be clarified, and starting with the notion of business users and end users. We are still assessing the parameters of the notion of users for a marketplace. Should it include all people that have an account, or customers who did make a transaction, customers who spend a certain amount of time on our services? Should this threshold be assessed on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis? An horizontal definition would very likely result in an overly broad scope and wouldn't fit the differences between core services and their uses. You are not active in the same manner, whether you use a social network or a marketplace. The gatekeepers have become unavoidable and indispensable for other businesses at EU-wide level, and this specificity must be properly reflected in the DMA. For example, the Commission proposed the criteria of the presence of a gatekeeper in at least 3 member states. Magdalena already talked about this. We think that this criterion should be specified so that the presence of the gatekeepers in each and every of these member states is truly substantial. Maybe now I will go on enforcement, sorry. Like any other piece of legislation, the DMA will have notice without proper enforcement. That's why we welcome the Commission's proposal for an EU-wide enforcement framework as a way to guarantee harmonized rules and counter opportunistic behaviors. However, simply monitoring gatekeepers' compliance with the DMA obligation will be a huge task for the Commission, and this is one of the reasons why the DMA needs strong coordination and cooperation mechanisms between competent authorities across Europe, and I think that the Beric opinion very much shows this. In that matter, the national authorities, competition authorities, data protection authorities, have each a lot of specific expertise that could serve the DMA's objective, but this expertise needs to be put together at all times and serve to take common decisions applicable across the EU. Indeed, the stakes are too high for the EU to reach a halfway solution for the governance of the EU's digital markets. Full harmonization is the key word. We would also add that the involvement of other stakeholders in the process could serve the decision-making progress. Smaller market players and business users of gatekeeper services should always be able to engage a dialogue on compliance issues with competent authorities, both at EU and national level, and we therefore support Beric's proposition of a dispute mechanism. Regarding obligations for gatekeepers, when placing obligations on gatekeepers, one must have in mind that the scope is to recreate equal conditions for innovation. We appreciate that the DMA could set much shorter procedural delays than in the case of ex-post competition inquiries, which is a great step ahead. And this is also why there is a need for clearly defined governance frameworks. We can also see that the Commission is seeking to address some specific market failures by establishing self-executing obligations for all core platform services. It's how we understand Article 5, but also some obligations that may be further specified by the Commission, which would be Article 6. So it's great because the Commission seems to have taken into consideration the industry feedbacks as different business models call for different solutions, different obligation. We are still assessing, however, which are those obligations that may be further specified and in which conditions and which should be self-executing. Maybe one point to say that EU lawmakers could also assess the cost of compliance for gatekeepers well before the adoption of the DMA, and most importantly, whether there are any chances that these costs are passed on to trading partners and consumers, as it happened before with national taxation. Maybe in a few words, I would talk about other market entry issues, and maybe the major one would be that there's still a regulatory fragmentation in Europe. Unlike the US, where a company has immediate access to a single market of millions of consumers, the European market remains very fragmented. Even if the EU has used its power of harmonization, we still have some issues regarding this topic. I can give a simple illustration with GDPR, because today, because of national data protection authorities did not agree on a common framework for retaining payment information for the purpose of facilitating future transactions on the platform, some European players, depending on their country of origin, cannot offer the same seamless one-click payment experience to their users. This may seem like a minor issue, but it creates major market distortions. Such distortions should not exist and would not exist if the GDPR had a more streamlined enforcement framework, and this is what we also expect from the DMA. To conclude, we believe that the current proposal is a good baseline, but that more work is needed to make sure that the regulation will be effective in tackling market failures. We understand that there is a strong political commitment to adopt and start enforcing this regulation soon, but going too fast could result in a toothless regulation. The most important thing is to ensure that the scope only covers the most harmful practices from the handful of players which dominate the tech landscape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecile. We have also for you the title proposals, and I think that with all that we have heard, we have a lot of thinking to be done. So we have already several questions, but first, we have here several proposals and ideas. Probably it's better to give you the opportunity to react now to any of what you have heard, agree, not agree. In the case of Prabhat, if he wants to clarify anything, I mean, up to you all, but it is very interesting what we have heard. And after that, we start with the questions. I said that you prefer to start directly with the questions. So if anyone raises the hand or wants to take the floor, I think that Prabhat, no? Yes. So the floor is yours, Prabhat.
Thank you. I will not take too much time, because I am impressed by all the speakers' time discipline. I think I was the only one who was over time, and so I don't want to make it worse now by speaking for a long period of time. But I want to just thank all the speakers for the useful feedback. I think maybe I'll just make 3 short points. I think that will just maybe understand explain some of our basic thinking. I think first of all, I think it's very encouraging for us to see also in the context of this discussion here, the broad convergence on many architectural elements of this of the Digital Markets Act. I think it's not surprising, nor is it a secret, to tell you that the fundamental architecture of the Digital Markets Act is not a trivial thing to put together. When we were working on it last year, and is a quite, in terms of regulatory approach, I would say rather innovative in where we are. So I think my first point is just also thanks to the feedback and input that all of you have given, and the constructive discussions that we had, to hear that the overall architecture, the objectives, and the direction of travel of the Commission is what many of the participants here in the panels have expected from the Commission, and it's constructive to see now that we are in a refinement phase in the co-decision, where we are reacting to the specifics of the proposal that is on the table now. Now, a couple of things that I wanted to just stress directly is that one of the trade-offs that we have, and I think is a trade-off that is very well known to Beric, but also to many other stakeholders, is between speed and flexibility. So you can make and these are directly trade-offs, and I've heard some of the colleagues here saying, you know, we should be a bit faster, or we should be a bit flexible, and we should have. But some of these things are relatively directly mutually trading off each other. So we can have a more flexible framework, but unavoidably it will be slower. And this is not necessarily easily compensated by multiplying the number of agencies that will be involved in a particular assessment. And of course, we have always maintained that to bring in expertise is certainly something that the Commission is keen on going. But when we are dealing with a very flexible framework that accommodates, and I think Aurélien also mentioned some forward-looking elements, then unavoidably we should avoid the trap that this becomes again a framework that suffers from the fact that that speed is a problem, and that we are entering into a mode where case-by-case assessment is necessary in order prior for the Commission can act. I mean, I think this is already the case with existing competition rules, and I think they will continue to apply, of course. And case-by-case assessments there are important. Similar, there's a trade-off between the scope of the proposal and the obligations that apply. Yeah? So of course the narrower the scope, in a way, the narrower but yet deeper the obligations could apply. You know, if you have only 2 gatekeepers in scope, then of course the number of practices that we are concerned with is probably smaller, but the obligations can undoubtedly be so. At the same time, if you have a very broad scope, I think this is what I'm saying is more or less trivial. But if you have a very broad scope then of course the range of issues that you might be encountering are naturally broader, but the depth of the regulatory intervention needs to be softer, because for proportionality reasons they cannot be in each kind of have. So in this trade-off, what the Commission has proposed is after kind of account that we saw. The practices that are well documented practices, and it's very interesting to hear some areas where you know, colleagues are asking for sharper or further measures. You know, certainly something that will be a part of our discussions going forward. And on scope, a greater clarity is a call that I hear very much. But there also we need to be honest in saying that there is a give and take, in the sense that we have built our impact assessment based on what was publicly available or through commercial or public databases in terms of scope numbers, you know. But in order to, like in the telecommunications or in the banking sector, real regulatory powers need to also be able to obtain a detailed knowledge from the regulated entity itself. So, of course, I'm happy to discuss further refinements to get greater clarity, but the scope criteria were based on the best available data as we had as it was in front of us in the method and the approach that we. One final reaction from my side is on the startup dynamics. I think that Benedict, you used the analogy of mowing the lawn. I think you know, our objective was actually exactly opposite of mowing the lawn. In fact, you know, you could say that the platform to business regulation was mowing the lawn, because it was applying to everybody. But of course, it was mowing the lawn, and it reminds me that I need to mow my lawn, but with a very you know, soft blade, you know, because it wasn't really. But here, I think very carefully it's drafted. Even emerging gatekeepers can only be, under certain circumstances, be subject to a very small subset of obligations. And that also only further to a particular investigation that needs to be carried out. So, yeah, I think that's slightly unfair. I just want to push back against that characterization of the DMA, because it was particularly designed to not mow the lawn, but to focus on the areas where we really have these strong asymmetries available. But then let me close my initial reaction by just saying that I think this is an extremely rich and valuable discussion. I think it's really also very good to see the constructive spirit and the reality checks of the Commission's proposal against the realities of the ground, of many of which you are representing. And we are certainly very much looking forward to continuing the discussion and furthering the discussions in forums such as this, but also, of course, in the context of the co-decision. Jorge, back to you with these initial reactions.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone wants to react to not only go to what Prabhat has stated, but also from others, etc.? This stage, you can. I think that we have. Yes, please.
Just briefly, allowing myself to clarify, I think the reference to mowing the lawn was particularly about a study we did of investors, where we asked them the fundamental question whether, when they see policy making, especially in Brussels, that is designed to target big players, that it more often hits the smaller players. This was a study from 3 years ago, and then 81% of the investors we surveyed said were affirmative of this statement. This was not referring to the DMA, but on the DMA, I would say it's kind of agreeing with the point that was made before. It's not necessarily about who we hit or the size, as the colleague from Schibsted, I think, also said, but about the practice. If there's something anti-competitive, anti-contestable going on, and that's also kind of, you know, if you think about the startups and scale-ups we represent, who all want to be big, it should be about, you know, whether any company, whether a company is doing something that is holding others back, you know, preventing contestability. Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So perhaps we can start with the first round of questions. No? Kiera,
Yes, so we received one question from Proton Mail by email. So and it's a bit actually connected, strongly connected to what Aurélien was saying before about default setting and pre-installation. So we'll ask it, and then if you see that you want to complement it or the others want to react, it is about Article 6.1b of the DMA, saying that it allows uninstallation of apps, but does not solve the problem of self-preferencing via defaults. And that by applying default settings, companies like Google and Apple cement their dominance for the apps and ensure the an inherent advantage of to the rival app developers. So do you think that the current DMA is sufficiently addressing this problem of self-preferences and via default settings in particular? And if not, how could it be extended? So the DMA, how could it be improved? So I don't know, Aurélien, if you want to, if you have some other points to complement your first intervention, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chiara, and thank you to the colleagues of Proton for asking. We very much agree with their approach. To be more specific, the provision that is today in the DMA on allowing the installation of apps would be of a secondary effect to the issue we have with default settings. The various studies, literature on consumer behavioral bias shows that for digital markets, when we are talking about an entrenched existing service, consumers largely stick to default when they are presented to them. So the importance is not to be able to uninstall what's there, because on a device you can always create a folder somewhere where you put the apps that you do not use, but it's more about what is presented to you as a user. And we think that when it comes to core platform services of Gatekeepers, users should be given a choice.
Thank you very much, Zorrinho. Does anybody want to react on this point about by default settings, which is something, as Zorrinho was mentioning before, something that we are also addressing in our report. And we didn't mention it before, but the report is open to public consultation. So also for the participants, if you have positions on these points and any other points about the DMA, we really invite you to respond to the public consultation, because we are really eager to receive your feedbacks and comments on this. So if any others of the speakers want to react on this point, Magdalena.
I'm testing how to raise virtual hands. So I don't have a specific comment on the operational system itself, but maybe a more broader comment. And I totally agree with what Prabhat said, that this is a very, very tricky exercise to make. But just to give you an example, when we talk about unfair business practices, there's a completely different situation when we talk on about app stores in the situation of app producers, where currently we have pretty much 2 app stores and very, very few operating systems. And when we compare, for example, to marketplaces, right? Because we do have not only several marketplaces, but I would argue a very, very dynamic competition with other online players, right? So Allegro as an online platform is competing with Zalando, who is rather a retailer. So for me, a point when drafting, and I think a bit of again, refinement could be useful in these provisions, is when we refer to situation of operating systems or app stores, let's make sure that this is clear in the text, because sometimes when we want to try to translate certain obligations or prohibitions, it's not always clear, and then it's difficult to assess on a different business model what actually the impact would be. Just to give you an example, even the interoperability provision, which, if I'm not mistaken, is not defined in the DMA itself, it could mean so many different issues in the different models. So I would say it's great to see this specificities in the legal act. And also, second point from my side, because we tend to use a bit of simplifications, saying platform business model creates problem in itself. There, of course, there are some challenges. I would argue they were largely addressed by P2B regulation that covers all the platforms across business sectors. But I think the business model of platform is not in itself, it's not problematic. I would argue that more and more companies, even retailers, would go into platform models. So just to flag that, I think this is something that also we should be quite specific about.
Yeah, if I may just complement on that, on the point of the scope and to what companies the obligations should apply. I would take again the example of the default settings in search. The reason why we focus on the core platform services of Gatekeepers is that we think that this detrimental impact of defaults happens when a service is set as default on the platform that is already an important gateway for business users to reach end users. And so in search, it means concretely that we want to target what Google would do on Chrome that controls a large chunk of the market, but not necessarily what the default is on Mozilla Firefox, for instance, which has a much lower market share in browsing, and where the search default wouldn't really impact that much the reality of the market. And that takes me to another point, which is the absence of browsers in the DMA. We have heard the Commission say that the reason of the absence of browsers is that they cannot be characterized as a multi-sided platform. That's a point that I think we can contest as such. It is indeed an important gateway for business users like us to reach end users, for instance, for their search service, and also through, for instance, add-ons on browsers. And in any case, I think coming from our search experience, we want to say quite clearly that it is the primary gate for accessing the web and for using search services.
Thank you very much, Aurelian. Does anyone wants to react or intervene? Timor, if not, we move to the next question. Yeah, the next question, Petra, probably you have seen in the chat, but I'm reading just in case any others cannot see the chat, is from Frederick De Backer from Telefonica, who asks to Petra if the DMA also solves the problem of laws taxes between advertisers and publishers. So, Petra, yes. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Well, we certainly do think that it will. I mean, the problem, if we are talking about the same kind of taxes, the taxes that I alluded to in my introduction, we call them ad tech taxes, and these are the fees that basically get lost in between the advertiser and the publisher, and there is that transparency problem. So we don't know actually how much, what kind of fees are being taken by the different parts of the advertising network. And of course, if you don't have any transparency, it's very difficult to do anything about this. So I would say that the transparency is first and foremost important, but it's also important to be able to negotiate. I mean, if we think about an analogy to the telecom world, where media companies, mainly broadcasters, would negotiate for example, distribution of TV channels with the telecom companies, usually there is a negotiation about fees. And that is the thing that we lack here. We can't negotiate. There is no possibility, because it's take it or leave it. If we, for example, do not apply by the terms and conditions in the App Store, we are threatened to be kicked out of the App Store. So these are the kind of situations that we think are being solved also by having the possibility to have fair terms and conditions. The problem, of course, is that Article 6.1k on that particular notion only relates to app stores. And I would argue that it would be useful to extend that also to, for example, these ad networks or search engines and so on. But we certainly believe that these kind of ad tech taxes would be solved. Also, of course, knowing that the Commission, as we understand it, is looking at this particular problem, and also some competition authorities in various member states and in other countries as well.
Thank you very much. So, Chiara, perhaps, I don't know, anyone wants to react? So, Chiara, perhaps we should start with the questions we had. So,
I have a question to build on what Aurelian was saying about the web browsers, for instance, because there are indeed some CPSs which may be considered as important and which are not there, or others that you don't see that are particularly relevant. And our question was even more broadly, because there are, of course, some gatekeepers who are providing several CPSs and or other services which are not CPSs. So the first question is, do you see any service which is relevant and should be in the list of CPSs and which is not there yet? And also, when these gatekeepers, I mean, let's say, is there another way to address this presence of the gatekeepers on relevant services, and to address it in a way that this ecosystemic nature is taken into account? So maybe can be like adding another CPS to the list if it is relevant, or doing it in a different way. Of course, some obligations in the DMA are already considering this point, taking into consideration the fact that the gatekeepers is also providing different services, but we would be interested in knowing if you think that this is already correctly addressed, or how this ecosystemic nature could be further integrated into the considerations of the DMA. it was a tough question.
Is it addressed to me?
No, it is. I mean, it's for everybody, but since it's about what is already there in the DMA, maybe I don't know if the speakers they have an opinion on this.
I mean, I would risk being redundant, unfortunately. There, I think I already made the point on the absence of browsers. You know, if I can be a bit more specific of what it means in search. You know, on mobile, DuckDuckGo launched you know, a browser, which is fairly successful, but still far from, you know, from the established default on Android or Safari. And the reason is that we launched the browser, you know, for different reasons, for offering more privacy to users, also for being able to offer our search engine there. But then we faced that issue one level up at the operating system level, where the incumbent would set as default their own browser. So I think it's if there's an area where the ecosystem dimension is not sufficiently taken into account, that would be in the area of search.
Maybe I'll try to answer, although now with other EUTA members, we are discussing the issues that you raised, Chiara, so I don't have a final answer, especially on the core platform services. We will shortly discuss that. I think when it comes to adding practices, in some cases, certain provision could be helpful, but what we want to wonder now is rather than have few provisions that could help, to have a more specific provision. Something that was very often coming up in our discussions, even before the DMA was published, when we thought, on the one hand, we do see the need for this regulation. On the other hand, we are concerned that as a national champions with the important positions on their national markets, we could be captured. We kind of always discuss that the risk of gatekeeper entering on our market, not necessarily geographically, but the market that we are in. So for Allegro, that I also represent, would be a marketplace, but it could be also dating services for social networks, etc., etc. The fear is that if you have a gatekeeper, what the pool of data is uncomparable to any other pool of data of any European companies. And often these data are collected because we use the services of a gatekeeper. So then if these data are used to enter the market and compete with us, we think this is really unfair, and this puts everyone in a position when you cannot really compete on equal terms. So this was something that was resonating a lot. Whether this is addressed at every sector, we will need to discuss that, and we will definitely come back. But this also, I think, comes back to this perception of market entry, right? Because if we build analogy from telco world and former monopolies often like streaming from public services, it's a bit different. The challenge there was really to open the market and allow new players. Now, very often is the question of how Gatekeeper would enter new markets and how to make sure that those that are on this market can still compete on equal terms, regardless all the powers, let's say, Gatekeeper have.
Thank you very much, Magdalene. And indeed, what we are mentioning also in the report is the power to leverage, the ability to leverage this power on additional services, which is reinforcing this ecosystemic nature. So we would, of course, be interested also afterwards to hear your thoughts on this once you have the established position. Benedict, please.
Yeah, just jumping in here. Our position will also be forthcoming shortly. It's been, as kind of also the nature of your question showed, a really complicated one to get the kind of whole ecosystem view on. And you'll see where we are supportive of the points or where we might see improvements. I think I can share that in the consultation of our members. There hasn't really been another CPS that has been identified right now, to be added to this already quite exhaustive list. But it does kind of, there is a question which has been coming from the members, and maybe this will be a great opportunity to throw the ball back to Prabhat. And it's kind of, I don't know if it's a procedural or systemic question around how are we kind of going to identify, to add or to potentially take down prohibitions and obligations from these lists if we have this contestability idea at the heart, and maybe something in the future might not be an issue of contestability anymore, or maybe there might be a new issue which we would like to see added. What the process will be, how are we talking to the ecosystem, to the innovators, to see if it makes sense to add more. And of course, the police has to come by now in this moment. And one more public service announcement, maybe to kind of preempt Prabhat, just for everyone else who's not excellently represented through Beric. The Commission is consulting on the Commission adoption, so it is collecting feedback on the DMA for those of you who still want to share your thoughts with Prabhat in a written form. I'll throw the ball over to Prabhat.
Thanks, Benedict. You indeed anticipated one thing I wanted to say is that the Commission's post-legislative feedback period is still open until I think the first week of May, and actually it was automatically updated by software once translations are added, new translations are added, and some of the rarer language were translated quite late, and so that's something that is still possible. And indeed, on the DSA, we have received some 140 feedback items, and on the DMA, we're still at a lower number, so there's still a possibility for this community to compete with the DSA in terms of feedback items. Now, maybe if I just take a couple of points. I mean, in the CPS, I think that the feedback on whether the list of CPSs is the right one is certainly going to be interesting for us. It's also something that I think is being discussed very intensively in Council and Parliament, and so far we have been able to, I think, convince colleagues that there's a link, as I said also right at the beginning, between the type of practices that we've identified and the CPSs that we have in scope. And so that link, so the question, Chiara, that you're adding is a little bit, I think it's a bit only of a half question, because I think taking away CPSs or adding them also needs to be seen in light of the actual obligations that entail with it. So it's not only about the scope alone, it's about which practices are we talking about. And I think in this way, Daniel's intervention was very interesting, because he made the link between a particular practice and a particular platform service. Certainly something to examine. So I don't think that we should only say this core platform service is an access gateway or a gatekeeper, and therefore it needs to be in scope of a core platform service. No, it needs to be, I think, in my view, also be linked to some kind of established systemic unfair trading practice, which is then linked to Articles 5 or 6. So otherwise, I think there's also no limit to aspects that you there's a whole stack between you and the services that you use, and there are many things that are invisible and could easily become could theoretically become gatekeeper power, but they don't de facto become. So this link, I think, is quite an important one, and I think in that case, so I wouldn't say that the question is should browsers be added to this core platforms list, but the question is a little bit in line with in the way that Aurélien formulated is browsers should be added because they are involved in a particular type of unfair practices that we have experienced, and it leads to foreclosure of the market. I think this is a much more powerful framing than just to look at other points or of access gateways. Now to Benedict's question, I mean, the Commission in the Commission's proposal, we made a very carefully designed method of updating obligations for gatekeepers, and the intention was to add, not to take away. And I think that the takeaway possibility is still there, because I think that we have in one of the market investigations into new services and new practice also the mechanism in Article 17 that would lead to a revision of it, and that's the natural mechanism by which we would take away obligations as well if they become obsolete. So it's not like we have never thought about taking them away, but the taking away is probably a bigger step. I think one other point that is perhaps important to signal is that the design of Article 5 and 6 in the Digital Markets Act is intended to give signaling power to the markets, and so that before you engage in these practices, you know that you should not engage. So it's a bit different from the existing logic under competition rules, whereby ex post you then have to correct behavior. But this is ex ante, so we signal to the market these are no-go zones, and these are, as Executive Vice President says, often do's and don'ts that you need to engage with. So that's also a little bit that's also a little bit the reason. Now, in terms of takeaway, there's a kind of question behind your question. Is that Benedict, is you're kind of assuming that there is a market dynamics which is such that in future at some point some of these practices might become innocuous. In fact, might be such that we would welcome them, perhaps. And I think that we have clearly looked at that in a different way. Is that these are practices that should not happen, full stop, unless we revise the regulation, maybe also for a Article 17 trigger, to take a fresh look at whether it's still up to date. So this is part of the normal monitoring and evaluation logic as well. It's just slightly less flexible and less reactive than the Article 10 procedures that the Commission has proposed in terms of updating some of these provisions. But it's maybe the broader point here is that we do want DMA to be as future-proof as possible within the scope of a normal regulation. But as you all know, I mean, there are certain limits to this, and it comes back again to my original point about a particular the trade-off between speed and flexibility. Yeah? So that's kind of built in. So these are my answers, I think. But in some cases, I think for sure we as I said, we are kind of certainly open to studying the post-legislative feedback on the Better Regulation website as well, and to digest it. And I'm sure this will also be done by the co-legislator.
Thanks a lot, Prabhat. And on the let's say self-executing obligations, we had the feeling as well that it's good because they create some general understanding of what is wrong and what would be punished. And but then of course there is also this part about the flexibility that being future-proof, and on this then we take your point and we expressed ours. And for I see Petra, she raised her hand. Yes, please.
Yes, I just wanted to do a sort of a quick reflection, Chiara, to your point about ecosystem or leveraging, because I think they are really interesting concepts. And of course, what we are sort of looking for is to really have a clear concept of the scope, and also to make sure that we regulate those that really need to be regulated, because their behavior or their sort of power is such that they can conduct harmful behavior, but also become gatekeepers. And then I'm not sure that this notion of ecosystem perhaps is the right one, because ecosystem, many companies need to create ecosystems in order to also perhaps be more relevant to their users in many different ways. But from our point of view, it's really about leveraging, because if you are that kind of dominant or have that kind of market power in one market, and then you can very easily create a similar kind of power in a very different kind of market by leveraging that power. If we think about search going to shopping or these kind of different kind of offers that we might have, or we have devices going into app stores, or we have social networks going into marketplaces. I mean, we see that in all the business areas of Schibsted at the moment, where that kind of leveraging power is something which nobody else can do, and where you can immediately get a lot of users without having to do any marketing, for example, and become those kind of gatekeepers. So I would rather look at the leveraging power than the ecosystem power.
Thank you very much. So we have a couple more of questions and observations. First of all, probably you have seen there is a question to see discount from Rodolphe Lerouillet from ARCEP that is stating that some of your competitors have a full set of delivery services completing their marketplace. How is the DMA addressing this barrier to entry for you? Do you think it's fully integrated in the text? So it's essentially on that network for delivering parcels, etc. So, Cecilia, do you want to react?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, it's a very good question. When we look at the DMA, it feels like there's a prohibition of tying on ancillary services in Article 5. So at first look, it seems that this issue is covered, but actually, when we look at the market right now, there is no tying of ancillary service regarding to delivery services. The point here is that the competitors that Mr. Lerouillet is talking about are cross-financing some services at lost. And we know that it's the financial power of many big players that allows them to cross-finance some non-profitable activities, and delivery services is a perfect example of this, because actually it sets a model for the whole market. You know, when a big player is able to give a free service delivery for customers and not to charge too much to sellers to provide this delivery, it sets, you know, it gives a tone of the markets, and I'm not sure that the DMA is covering this issue right now, but unfortunately, I don't have any solution to give right now. But I think it's a very, very good question indeed, and of course we are looking at it right now.
Thank you very much, Chiara. Next one, and then
Yes.
Filino.
Yes, a question from Telefonica, and we mentioned in our proposals this dispute resolution mechanisms, and Telefonica is asking what you think about the need for this complaint handling mechanism, and whether it should be managed at the national or at the European level. So two different questions. So do you have the feeling that these kind of mechanisms would help in your relation with the gatekeepers? And if so, at what level should it be organized and set up? Yes, please, Zorrinho.
Thank you, Chiara. It's something that to us is really important, actually. And you know, when I take our experience with the Android case, to us, really a reason why the remedy introduced by Google ended up to be so inefficient is due to the flaws of the decision in itself, but also due to the fact that because of the way competition enforcement has been done, the Commission found itself in an unbalanced dialogue with Google as a powerful gatekeeper, and market competitors like us have not been involved in the shaping of that remedy. And looking ahead in the DMA framework, the involvement of market participants to make sure that they can contest potentially the measures proposed, show the relevant data, propose counter remedies is important. And in that context, the complaint handling mechanism goes into this idea that, broadly speaking, market participants should be involved in identifying potentially problematic practices, and then be involved in how remedies should be shaped.
Thank you very much, Jorgen. And the feedback we get when we are also discussing with stakeholders is also that some of them actually fear the reaction from the gatekeepers if they are giving information on the giving some information about their relations with the gatekeeper. So for us, it's also a way to structure this kind of information gathering. So to give the power to the Commission to request very clear information, and also for these stakeholders and challenger of the gatekeepers to be in a legal context in which the giving of this information, relevant information, is actually protected somehow. So it's something that we hear a lot from the stakeholders, actually, the fear that they have in devoting this kind of information, which could actually help them in the relation with the gatekeepers. I don't know if anybody else would like to complement or intervene on this point.
Maybe just to add that we believe that some sort of dialogue with the market, especially impacted by the decision. And I know that this dialogue happens during the procedure, right? But to my knowledge, there's no like efficiency check at the very end of the, at least when we talk under the competition dimension. So I think for the DMA, indeed, it could be beneficial, so that those that could be directly impacted by, let's say, decision of the Commission, or maybe the more specific decision clarifying provisions of the Article 6, just to get a bit of knowledge. But I understand that it wasn't forbidden, but maybe it would be good to give a bit more clarity in the DMA on that.
Yes, please, Prabhat.
Yeah, no, just I think these ideas are very interesting, but I just want to maybe wonder a little bit. And so first of all, Frédéric asked a question whether it should be handled at national level or EU level. I think that's subsidiary to the actual. If we can be a bit more precise about the goals and the purpose of what is being, because there are a lot of different objectives here. One is to gather information about affected parties, about a particular maybe implementation of an Article 6 prohibition. You know, this is one thing. Second one is ability for the Commission to actually even gather market intelligence from in the first place. This is yet another thing. Maybe this is something that in any case, you know, so bringing to the attention of the Commission a particular trading practice or a particular from in a structured way, you know, it's in the way that normally also competition enforcers, you can send a complaint or you can, in the context of the DMA. But then there's a kind of dispute resolution in the way that we understand it, and we have regulated it both in the P2B and also in the DSA proposal, you know, where there's a dispute between two parties, and we have made proposals, you know, for example, in the DSA or DMA about about the P2B, about delisting decisions or those kind of decisions, and then you have a kind of cascade of internal dispute resolution mechanism, you know, by which corresponds to a problem that nobody could talk to anyone in the platform. And then external dispute resolution where this internal resolution doesn't fall. What I feel a little bit and then we have also in P2B and also in other many acts, you know, issues of mediation, and of course in some other contexts, you know, people have been thinking about arbitration as well, and you know, a famous example from Australia that we have all seen and heard about in the news. I think that we just need to be a bit clear exactly which one of these different dialogues are we really speaking about, and which is the one that is most important for the issues at stake. Because and I think that this is greater clarity on bringing various parties together, either under the supervision of the Commission or with independent third parties, you know, is not per se a bad idea, but just we need to be a bit clearer on the exact scope and nature and purpose of which types of dispute, which kind of situation are we with which intended outcome. But just one thing that I wanted to clarify is that one thing that we are absolutely already now clear about is that the ability to raise issues and complaints to the Commission or to bring information to the attention of the Commission is certainly something that we have kind of assumed to subsume. And I have to tell you also, we already had it in P2B and through the observatory. And indeed, much of the impact assessment was informed by companies, many of which are parts of your association. So they're bringing these issues to us in the first place. So just want to say that some part of your concerns are clearly already on the radar. Others, when it comes to really resolving, and when it comes to dispute resolution or mediation or arbitration, what is very important for the Commission is that we don't come into a situation whereby we have endless discussions about efficiency defenses or arguments and counter arguments, which can then lead to a multi-year negotiations on particular things, and because this would be then a weakening of the DMA with the self-executing natures. So that's maybe a couple of boundary conditions around this issue of dispute resolution mechanism, which could be a very rich topic, certainly worth further exploring. But in order to improve the impact of the DMA, we need to be careful of some boundary conditions there. Just a quick comment on that. We're certainly not fundamentally opposed to involving third parties in making the impact better, for sure not.
Thank you very much, Prabhat. I think Petra wants to react. No, okay.
So then, we are at 3 minutes to the hour. You have probably seen the observation, I would say, from MVNO Europe, the Association of Mobile Virtual Network Operators, about extending Article 6A on referring also on restricted on the technical parameters for configuring communication. That is a good example of how things interrelate among all. We will take into account in our report, and we ask MVNO Europe to send us for our response. I don't know if anyone wants to react on this at this stage, because it's in the middle between telco and. If not, we were to give you as a present 10 minutes for a coffee before the next video conference. That is the best present that you can do nowadays, but it has been impossible. So we have just 2 minutes, so it's time for closing remarks. It has been very useful for us, for American members. We hope that also for Prabhat it has been useful. I think that it has been to hear from stakeholders, and simply to remind you about our public consultation ending on 4th of May, and to tell you that this is only the first of a series of workshops we are to organize regarding the DMA. We are also configuring one on end users, and that's all. Thank you very much to everybody, and especially to all of our speakers. I don't know, Chiara or Michel.
Yeah, no, I think we take away many important points. So thank you very much, and I think we all support this the ambition of the European Commission. So it's a very, very important step, and I think we are all there with a very positive attitude, just to make sure that it's really reaching its ambitious objectives. But we are very happy of what is on the table. So congrats again to the European Commission, and thanks a lot to the speakers for these very important points that you've raised, and for engaging with us. We've written down everything, so it will certainly be integrated in our report. So thanks a lot.